Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. All protocol observed. Working? Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. All protocol observed. Welcome to the Digital Transport Corridors Forum. Very interesting because it's a silent forum, like a silent disco. So good to have you all here. This conference is about sustainable, safe, clean corridors, transport corridors. And I'm glad to have a stellar panel with me today. We have a number of key questions that we are asking at this forum. The big ones are, how can we invest in clean transport corridors? We'll debate the opportunities that transport corridors offer to facilitate sustainable, efficient, smart, resilient, affordable, secure, and safe mobility and trade with Europe, within Europe, especially with the Western Balkans and Eastern neighborhood, and with Africa, and of course between Africa and Europe. As we are well aware, on one side of the globe in Africa, we have excitement, drums are beating because of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area that offers so many opportunities for trade within Africa. For the first time, we have an opportunity and hope to actually increase trade from the current 18% to at least 35% by 2035. But all is not rosy because we do have challenges around these corridors. Bottlenecks, roadblocks, delays at border crossings, poor infrastructure, customs that are not connected, big challenges around connectivity. And yet there is so much hope. But we're also saying, what can we move along these corridors? What are the value chains? What are the goods that we can produce? So there's both optimism and hope, but also the reality of what the corridors offer. And that's why this global gateway of the EU is a critical platform and a critical opportunity to see how we can work together to create safe, sustainable corridors. But there's also the issues of emissions. As trade grows, as transport increases, emissions are likely to grow. As production increases, how can Africa do this in a green way? On the other side, unfortunately, we have the Ukraine conflict, Ukraine-Russia conflict, that has brought with it untold misery, devastation, loss of lives, but also huge global chain supply challenges around critical foods, energy, and other inputs like fertilizers. We are seeing the world held in the arms of, one man, I might say. And we are seeing challenges in moving goods from Ukraine to the rest of the world. Little did we know how connected we are. But as I speak now, we have countries in Africa that are facing starvation. Chad has announced a disaster. South Sudan, Sudan itself. Kenya, in Kenya where I live, the price of bread has almost doubled in the last few weeks. So things are really not good. How can we move safely tons and tons, millions of tons of grain and wheat from Ukraine where it's held up to the rest of the world that needs it? The seas are mined. How do we get goods across? So these are the challenges we are going to face. And in the midst of all this, we are faced by the COVID epidemic that has created huge strains for governments, huge strains on financing. We are fortunate that we have with us a stellar panel of policymakers, leaders from around the world. And to start us off, we have the EU Commissioner for Transport, Commissioner Valen, who is going to lead with an opening key address, looking at the strain of COVID, but also the opportunity for reform and what the role transport has to play in all this. So Commissioner Valen, I welcome you to the stage. Thank you.
Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear all, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here today with so many esteemed partners. The European Development Days offer an important forum to share and learn from our experiences and to develop shared approaches to common challenges. Today, one of these challenges is, without a doubt, connectivity. Naturally, as the EU Transport Commissioner, it is a challenge I hold particularly dear to my heart. Transport is the backbone that connects global citizens and businesses. It is a critical enabler to prosperous economies and societies. In the EU, we have built our trans-European transport network for over 3 decades. Today, the network forms the arteries that have enabled our European single market to thrive. We are still far to be done. And that is why we are taking a step-by-step approach, focusing first on the most strategically important transport corridors before looking to complete a more comprehensive Europe-wide network by 2050. Of course, the challenge is not only to meet the huge investments needed for building and maintaining these transport networks, but to make sure that our investments contribute to making them safer, smarter, more sustainable, and more resilient across all transport modes. In terms of sustainability, we have, for instance, proposed minimum binding targets across our transport network for electric fast recharging and hydrogen refueling points to support the decarbonization of road transport. We also want our trans-European network to provide the basis of the large-scale deployment of new technologies and innovations such as 5G infrastructure. This will help enhance the overall efficiency of our European transport sector. But perhaps resilience is the real key word of the start of this decade, which has not been short of crises, from the outbreak of COVID to the acceleration of extreme weather events caused by climate change, and most recently, Russia's unprovoked and unjustified invasion of Ukraine. Each of these crises has strengthened our transport links in a new and often unexpected ways. We had to learn quickly, and in the EU, our experience is building a shared trans-European transport network, in removing barriers, creating a single market for transport, establishing corridors, and ensuring a coordinated approach in terms of infrastructure development and investment. All this helped us respond. Thanks to this, we were able to quickly develop and put in place the concept of green lanes during the COVID situation when borders were closed between countries. These were pivotal in keeping essential goods from flowing across borders and keeping supply chains intact following the outbreak of the pandemic. Faced with the threat of a global food crisis, resulting directly from Russia's aggression on Ukraine and its destruction of key transport infrastructure, we are again building on our corridor approach to set up what we call solidarity lanes. These lanes are designed to enable Ukraine to export the goods and step up connectivity between Ukraine and Europe, including by diversifying routes for the benefit of both exports and imports. The main purpose on the short term is to scale up the exports on new routes. We also have a long-term thinking to address the infrastructure problems that are now proving to be a big obstacle. Once the reconstruction of Ukraine can begin, we also plan to establish new infrastructure connections and the new TEN-T core network corridors connecting the EU to Ukraine and Moldova. We will also work to improve navigability on the Rhine-Danube corridor. Our rivers present a huge asset for EU-Ukraine-Moldova connectivity. We already have quite some experience in extending our TEN-T network beyond the EU borders, namely to our neighbors in Western Balkans, the Eastern Partnership countries, and also for Turkey. Thanks to our joint efforts, people and freight can move more seamlessly in these regions, and with the EU fostering trade and integration and helping to attract additional investments from international financial institutions and the private sector, I would say this is a model we are looking at to expand. You will hear more in the next panel from Matej Zakoniek about our experience in extending the TEN-T policy to the Western Balkans after the historical signature in 2017 of our treaty establishing the transport community between the EU and the Western Balkans. This work is underpinned by substantial EU funding and technical support to help our Western Balkans partners implement their infrastructure priorities. In recent years, it has yielded significant policy and legislative reforms as our partners look to align with EU standards and norms, thereby fostering ever closer the integration. Building on these achievements, we have proposed extending a European transport corridor into the Western Balkan region, stretching from Austria to Greece and taking in all the Western Balkan countries, bringing substantial benefits to all involved. And of course, we are also looking beyond our immediate neighborhood to our partners in Africa, where we committed at the EU-AU summit last February to financing the development of 11 strategic corridors across the African continent, in line with the African Union's Agenda 2063 and the ambitions of the African Continental Free Trade Area. This is an unmissable opportunity to deepen the Africa-EU partnership, and our pledge is clear. We want our African counterparts to have full ownership of the process. On our side, we will finance high-quality, sustainable infrastructure in full transparency and building on our reputation for high standards and good governance. For obvious geopolitical reasons, we are also increasingly looking at the Central Asia. Now more than ever, we need alternative, reliable and efficient trade routes between Europe and Asia. We are currently studying sustainable transport connections, looking at the bottlenecks, missing links and investment needs in terms of both hard infrastructure and soft connectivity measures. We will have the results of this analysis next spring, together with a list of projects for improving infrastructure. I'm optimistic that this will be a catalyst that increases use of the middle corridor in particular and contributes to sustainable development within the countries of Central Asia more widely. So to conclude, today's turbulent times are a stark reminder of why we must work together to build sustainable, smart and resilient transport networks. Solidarity has proven to be one of the best ways to build resilience. So let us therefore continue to work to foster our connectivity for our businesses and for our people. Thank you very much.
Hello. Join me in welcoming Minister Mamadou Tangara, Foreign Affairs Minister from the Gambia, and Amin Idris Madu, Director of Programs from AUDA NEPAD. And we will also be joined by 3 other panelists online. That's the beauty of the hybrid. We will have Director of Transport, Matej Janoysk. I have to practice these names. We will have Director of ITC, Pamela Hamilton Cook, and we will have Bethel Madu, one of the young leaders from Nigeria. Welcome to the stage. So I'll start with the Director of Transport from the EU, and borrowing from the words of the EU Commissioner, this has required adaptation, strategic corridors. This critical time in history has required that we think creatively and co-create together. So I love the whole idea of the 11 strategic corridors that we have for Europe and Africa. I think it's a beauty. I had the pleasure to drive across from Abidjan to Lagos in January. 5 countries crisscrossing, crossed borders. It was an experience. And we're learning from you, Director Matej, what it is that we can do more of, and listening to the words of the Commissioner. So given the unique position of transport community and this historical moment we are living in, what is your vision on transport corridors with reference to experience in the Western Balkans? Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to be part of this very important panel. First of all, the importance, as Commissioner Valan just mentioned, is really to have the predefined multimodal and multi-regional corridors, because these are really the preconditions both for economic development on one hand, as well as the social cohesion on the other hand. And these are really these basic building blocks for prosperity as well as peace everywhere in Europe as well as everywhere else. So here the work of transport community is very much based on that principle. So on one hand, we are helping our partners with adoption and implementation of the EU legislation, which of course means standards of how transport is run. So we are adopting and implementing the highest EU standards. But on the other hand, we are also promoting specific connectivity projects that are all based on the TEN-T corridors, as Commissioner mentioned. So the question is why we need corridors, why we need to think in the terms of corridors when we are talking about transport specifically. It's because the corridors and the corridor logic is the one that defines priorities. And that is something that defines priorities both for governments, for citizens, as well as for international community, being financiers, being banks, or anybody else who wants to know what will happen in the region, where it will happen, and why it will happen. And that's why the corridors are so important. Allow me just to mention that corridors are also the heart of sustainable transport. And what I want to say with that is that it is sustainability with a big S. So economic sustainability, because they are connecting the major cities or economic bases of what we are doing in the Western Balkans or in the European Union. Also the social sustainability, because they're connecting communities, as well as the environmental, because the corridors are the one that we are going beyond the patchwork, so the patchwork of road connections or rail connections into a truly network logic of planning transport, which means connecting roads, railroads, inland waterways, ports, airports, all in one sustainable network. And that is the heart of the corridors.
Thank you, Matek. And I love the whole idea of the heart of the corridors and really connectivity, because, for instance, in Africa and even the Balkans, we see so many disparate reforms. So connecting these is critical. And again, you talk about standards, EU standards being critical and central to this new approach. So the Commissioner did speak about hard and soft, and I want to take my second question to the whole issue of digitalization. What role does digitalization play in modernizing multimodal transportation? And what measures can countries put in place to ensure digitalization does not put jobs at risk? That's a huge one. Thank you.
I will try to answer this question with that. First of all, I believe that digitalization is, first of all, a great opportunity for catch-up. So it's a great opportunity where we can actually breach the gap in the transport, and there is an infrastructure gap both here in the Western Balkans and also still in the EU, and with the EU programs and the finances, this is exactly what we want to address. Why I say it's a great opportunity for catch-up, because it offers also an opportunity to leapfrog, because actually we can go from having, for example, the ERTMS is one of the systems of electrification as well as the digital way of how the railways run. It went through various different stages. But now, actually, the partners here in the Western Balkans can go from the point where we are now, where we don't have the European railway system as such, to the most advanced in a single step. And that's why digitalization is actually one of the tools of actually catching up. Secondly, also, I do believe that digitalization is the key for sustainability. Why? Because, it really can revolutionize how fast and how efficient we can plan transport. Just think of what's happening at the border crossings. When we are talking about transport, we sometimes forget about the border crossings. But no matter how efficient transport we can have in the region, sometimes, not much, or, we don't realize the full potential of this if the passengers, specifically also the cargo, is waiting then for hours and hours at the border crossings. How much we can achieve with digitalizing the documents necessary for the border crossings, and how much we can actually make the networks much more efficient by digitalizing it. That's just one example, but there are many of it. And the last thing that I want to mention with digitalization, that it also offers a great opportunity for youth as well as women. Why am I saying that? Is because digitalization offers actually it offers the new way of working. When you go to the ports, which are fully digitalized, that means that actually the operation room of the port can be actually moved to the city, because there you just need a very good connection, but everything is done digitally. You don't need to have so much of a hard physical work. So there are different ways of actually bringing digitalization, and it's actually a solution and not a hindrance to the involvement of youth, but also for the better engagement and the gender parity within the transport.
Thank you, Director Matek. Really good insights there around revolutionizing transport, and especially for the Balkans and our own countries in Africa trying to leapfrog. I think it does definitely offer. And I like the fact that it collapses all those structures and bureaucracies, as you've said, at the borders and all. So thank you for that. Really good insights from you. I would now like to move on to you, Idris, from AUDA NEPAD, and the critical role that the AUDA does play working and delivering on PIDA. And he talked about the huge infrastructure gap that we have in Africa. Over $350 billion awaited and looked for to try and move the agenda forward. From your experience implementing PIDA, what models can provide for increased financing for corridor development, and what approaches can be followed? Idris?
All right, thank you very much for the question. But first of all, let me send the apologies of our CEO, Madame Nardos Bekele-Thomas, who couldn't actually make it. Now, going back to your question, there is one dimension that we need actually to take into account. It's the PIDA. The African Union member states have developed the Program for Infrastructure Development in Africa, which is the PIDA, and specifically the PIDA PAP 2, which lists about 69 projects around transport, ICT, water, infrastructure, and so on and so forth, with a total value of about $160 billion. And all the projects are designed around a corridor approach. So the challenge for us is how do we ensure the financing of all those very structuring projects. African Union Development Agency have designed an approach actually which is a de-risking process. And how do we do that? Basically, it's really about project preparation, early preparation stage. That's number one. We invest a lot of time, a lot of energy, actually, to ensure that we have very good preparation of the project, so that we can actually bring them at the level of bankability. That involves, obviously, several other steps, from the qualification, ensuring the quality of the process itself. That's number one. Number two, de-risking, and then number three, obviously building on in bringing together private and public a sector. So how do we make sure that we have private sector in the process? We have created the CBN, which is a Continental business network that actually really allow us to showcase the project and to discuss with the private sector together, so that we can identify bottlenecks and problems and move forward. And at the same time, we are encouraging the African Pension Fund and the African insurance companies to invest a little bit more of their assets under management in the continent. Right now, they're investing about 1.5% of the total asset of more than 1.5 trillion into infrastructure projects in Africa. But we believe that by going through all the de-risking approach and all the work that we are doing with them, by encouraging them, they can actually bring it at the level of 5% minimum. If we reach the 5%, that's going to be, I would say, quite structuring, and it could have a structural impact. So that's all the work that we are doing. The last two things, it's important actually really to work with governments, obviously with private sector, but it's really important as well to ensure that we have domestic resources that actually can finance our infrastructure in Africa. As you know, infrastructure is an integral part of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Without road, without transport, without ICT, we can't really, I would say, leverage on the opportunities that will be offered by the ACFTA. So both free trade area and infrastructure are pretty much interconnected, and they depend each one from the other.
Thank you very much, Idris, and very interesting insights there, because we're looking for money outside, so de-risking project prep, but you've also talked about domestic resources, and I think that is going to be critical as we try to bridge the 350 billion infrastructure gap. And you've talked a bit about creating an investment-ready projects and climate to make those projects attractive, but I want to talk specifically about opportunities for maritime corridors for Africa. We are surrounded by water. What are the opportunities, challenges, and financing to wrap up maritime corridors for intra-African trade and for trade with Europe? We've seen it's cheaper to ship to China from Gambia than it is to ship to Nigeria, and yet they share coastline.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, maritime transport in Africa is quite a challenge. Number one, we need to know that out of the 55 African countries, 16 only are landlocked. So that means the majority of African countries actually have access to sea. However, if you look at the number, there are 57 seaports in Africa, and 20 are in North Africa, 15 in West Africa, 10 in Southern Africa, quite a number in East Africa, and only 3 in Central Africa region. So you can see there is an unbalance actually even between regions. That's number one. Number two, African ports are not really, I would say, at the global standard, both in terms of infrastructure, but also in terms of technology and management system. That obviously increase the cost of running port and the cost of sea transport and maritime transportation in Africa. Therefore, what we are doing right now, we have integrated the maritime transport system into the PIDA, and we take the port, I would say the upgrade of the port infrastructure through the same process actually of project preparation to ensure quality project preparation. That's very key, it's important, but also we take them through the entire de-risking process that we have established with the Africa Infrastructure Guarantee Mechanism, which is part of the co-guarantee platform with the African Development Bank. That's number two. And then obviously we are also working with other partners, especially the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, to develop, I would say, policies that actually can bring countries together, with the same management system. That's number one, and that can also make, I would say, the connection and put all the ports management systems together. So there are 3 things here to conclude. Number one, we really need to ensure a good project preparation. That's number one. Number two, we need to take them through a de-risking process. That's number two. And then number 3, we also need actually policies that will make the management of the port and the connectivity and all the things that go together actually really flawless. So port and sea transport, maritime transport is definitely part of the PIDA PAP2 projects. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Idris. Talking about, again, de-risking and looking at efficiencies of these ports. I've been stranded in some of the ports, and it can be challenging for a business woman or man trying to ship their container to the rest of the continent. And you've also talked about policies, the right and appropriate policy framework, and I think it's appropriate that we have Minister Mamadou here to share some of the experiences from beautiful Gambia. Honorable Minister, I want to turn to you now. I know you're going to tell us a bit about the Trans-Gambia corridor and how you hope to connect the Gambia to the rest of the world and to Africa. But could you also tell me a bit about looking at vulnerable countries like yours and my own country, Uganda. How can we allow for better distribution of food commodities, especially where pandemics and war crises have become vulnerable? How can we prevent hoarding and export bans by major producers? This is something we're facing right now that is a reality for our countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, when it comes to the Trans-Senegambia Bridge, I think this is one of the biggest achievements of the current government, because for many years we've been talking about it, but we were unable to find a solution because of some political reasons. But today, more than ever before, Gambia and Senegal are very close, and the two leaders are trying to transform into concrete reality our belief, and that's the reality, that it's one nation with two states. So by building the Senegambia Bridge, we've connected the two sides of Senegal, and it's a corridor that opens up to other countries like Guinea-Conakry, Guinea-Bissau, and it has facilitated a lot of movement. And for our president, infrastructural development is a key area in his development plan, because he likes to quote Gandhi by saying that let's build the roads and the roads will connect us. And when we come to the issue of that you mentioned during pandemic, I think it's important that today more than ever before, the concept of the world being a global village was like a vague theory. But with the COVID-19, I'm not being cynical, I say it's one of the most democratic viruses. Today, more than ever before, we know that our life, we are interrelated, we are interconnected. What affects one affects all of us. And we cannot move and leave the others behind. And that's why we are duty-bound to work closely together and help each other to resolve some of the problems. And when you talk about hoarding, it's not only about the food, but the vaccine. We've seen what happened during the pandemic. Some countries refuse to share their vaccine, and we're talking about vaccine nationalism, which is completely absurd because, as I said, if you resolve it within your borders, the virus does not need a passport or a visa to travel. It will go wherever it wants. So we need to work together. And then we've realized at the end that some kept a lot of vaccine and they were unable to use it, and they were forced to dispose of it when some countries were grappling with vaccine. They could not get a vaccine, most of the African countries. But we thank God for some reasons. I think for this time around, things played in our favor. I don't know for whether it's a divine intervention, but the thing that people were expecting that we'll be dying as flies, thank God we survived it. It's still now very challenging. And we have vaccine, and unfortunately some of our population also are reluctant to take the vaccine. But maybe because of the youthfulness of our population, we are resisting, and then now the world has understood that we have to help each other, and we are grateful to the European Union, to the United Nations through COVAX, and the fact that we are going to manufacture vaccine in Africa itself to resolve some of these problems.
Thank you very much, Minister. You've talked about Gandhi and divine intervention in one breath, and I do take inspiration from that, because really for a continent as young and populous as ours, it's just been a miracle that we haven't had as many people dying. But of course now with the concerns around food security, energy security with this conflict and the bans of food export, there is real risk and danger. And so how we can connect our people more, it's going to be a big one for our governments. Minister, I want to move to the second question for you in terms of the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is really exciting and promising. And I know with your government signing, ratifying, we need to see how governments can play a quicker role, as a championing role in fostering adoption of the Continental Free Trade Area, and what lessons we can take perhaps from the EU. Do we see integration as good for us? What dividends can we draw from this integration process? Thank you.
I think we have the advantage of having the EU, and we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We can come and learn good practice from the EU. We have economic zones, but yet still we have barriers that will not allow the flow, free flow movement of goods and persons. We all know the realities when you travel around Africa. And the AFCTA, it's a good opportunity to enable Africans to do business within Africa and enter African business, because sometimes because of the communication challenges, it's easier to do business with China than within even Africa. Even traveling, sometimes it's to travel from one place to Africa, you have to come to Europe and then go back to Africa. So I think this is a very good opportunity. If we translate this aspiration into concrete realities, I think we can resolve some of our problems, because we've seen today with the war in Ukraine how it has adversely affected us. And that's why I come back to this issue of global village. We thought that maybe Ukraine is far away, not thinking that the war in Ukraine would affect us. But today we have problem of fertilizers, problem of wheat and others, and there is a looming food crisis in our part of the world. So this is also the need to try to be self-sufficient and promote intra-African trade to the new AFCTF. I always have AFCTA, and I'm happy that Gambia was one of the countries that signed it to put it into effect. And the headquarters is in Ghana, and we are looking forward to reaping the benefit of this very important agreement that Africans have signed within Africa. And then we hope that we'll be able also to get rid of all these barriers and then transform it into something that will benefit our people.
Thank you, Minister. Definitely a global village, definitely Africa connected. I told you there's so much hope when you hear the Minister speak with hope and optimism for our countries and our region. And for the last few months, we've traversed over at least 4 or 5 of those corridors by road. You can imagine driving from Abidjan to Lagos, passing all those border crossings and all those challenges. But just seeing the beauty and the opportunity, I think you do make a great point that we can do this for ourselves. We can actually create a new Africa, but we need the support of the EU, and we can learn a lot from the EU. And on that point, I would like to bring in the Director ITC, Pamela Koch-Hamilton, who is online. I hope you're there, Pamela. And really looking, yes, good morning to you. Really looking at the opportunities. There's so much anticipation from the governments in terms of value chains and developing and creating and bringing the people into this equation. So Pamela, how does the lack of efficient transport services and adequate infrastructure impact the lives of entrepreneurs in the context of the AFCFTA, and what does it change for SMEs, small business?
Thanks so much, Madam Moderator. And I'd like to start, first of all, by thanking our friends at TMEA and NEPAD and the European Union for organizing this panel. While I couldn't join you today, unfortunately, in person, there's a very enthusiastic and energetic ITC contingent in Brussels with you today. So please go and check out our booth. So that's my ad for this morning. Since we're speaking to a wider public, for those that don't know ITC well, we're a joint agency of the UN and the WTO that helps small business in developing countries go global. So referring to your opening remarks and those of the Commissioner Valen, I'd say that the central importance of mobility of people, goods, and services has made the need for transport corridors much like that of Wi-Fi. If you're fortunate to live in an environment where trade corridors simply work, where logistics and transport just run smoothly in the background, where access is affordable and secure, it's easy to take it for granted. If you don't, though, the costs of moving goods efficiently from point A to point B can make the difference between a business that flourishes and a business that flounders. And that's especially true for small businesses. So let me link what could easily be a very dry and technical discussion to the big guiding ideas: African integration, inclusivity, connectivity, and sustainability. How do transport services and transport infrastructure underpin the AFCFTA? Simply put, it's the bedrock of the agreement. Everything else, tariff concessions, rules of origin, services schedules, rests on proper transport pathways. Without it, the AFCFTA will end up as so many other trade agreements. That is just words on the page. World-class transport corridors matter for small businesses in Africa. It's the simple logic of costs. If you're one of the big trading firms with large volumes and your own fleet of trucks, your well-paid customs brokers and an army of assistants to fill out customs forms, then you can manage. But if you are a small firm trading small volumes, then you depend on the wider ecosystem to support you, to connect and compete in overseas markets. And that's where we come in. For me and my staff at ITC, making the AFCFTA a success is all about making trade happen. We work from the ground up to level the playing field in favor of small business. We also build the capabilities and market intelligence of African SMEs so that they understand where tangible market opportunities lie along corridors and value chains. We also work with governments to ensure that their trade facilitation reforms are state-of-the-art, that governments build bridges with the many private sector groups and business support organizations across Africa that are the voice of so many entrepreneurs without direct access to officials and bureaucracies. And most importantly, we're working with the African Union, the AFCFTA Secretariat, regional economic communities, and governments across the continent to build regional value chains, to use our market intelligence tools and trade data to really understand which sectors we can link up suppliers all across the African continent and create more value-added goods that are truly branded as made in Africa. Let me also give one concrete example. ITC, through its work on establishing the African Trade Observatory, collects and shares detailed data on border crossing time through each stage of clearing customs. This gives policymakers a real-time perspective on how long the delays are at their borders. It also shows them in which areas and processes their firms face the greatest challenges. It gives them the information to tackle and remove bottlenecks. And the benefits, of course, will be enormous. Our own estimates show that efficient trade corridors in Africa would bolster intra-regional trade and create $23 billion of untapped potential in just a few years' time. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Pamela, for grounding us, for bringing us to reality, because when we trade, it's people who are trading. It's hundreds of thousands of businesses, small businesses, and in Africa, it's really small businesses. From the headlord, women carrying goods on their heads, to small farms that produce daily for consumption, but also for trade. And our governments, and the minister here will tell you, are really excited about growing regional value chains, and the work you do is critical. How can corridors further support the development of these regional value chains so as to spur trade, especially within Africa, but also within Africa and Europe? So something more on the regional value chains and what can be done.
Sure. I mean, it's true that beyond the AFCFTA dimension, we need to look more carefully at the issue of inclusivity, connectivity, and sustainability. For me, this is the real challenge. It's the real litmus test of whether the benefits of the African integration remain captured by a few large firms, as is so often the case with trade arrangements between developing countries or within developing countries, or whether it leads to transformational change and economic growth. The best and most obvious way to make these corridors inclusive is to make them smart. If COVID has shown us anything, and I agree with the minister when he said it is the most democratic disease ever, if it has shown us anything, it's that the route to markets, especially for SMEs, are through digital channels and digital platforms. So one key message here is that measures like electronic cargo systems, tracking systems, and digital payment systems aren't just ways of making transport corridors more efficient. They're also ways of making them more inclusive and more sustainable as well. But there's another dimension, which is the livelihoods and well-being of the communities along that corridor. Just a few months ago, I stood at the border between Guatemala and El Salvador, visiting an ITC project that supported a border community being affected by trade facilitation reforms. We were helping the community, particularly those at risk of migrating, to reskill and take advantage of new opportunities and new markets. It reminded me that whether you're in Central America or Central Africa, that while trade facilitation, borders, and logistics can be quite dense and technical subjects, they always have a very human dimension. So let me end there, and thanks once again for inviting ITC to be a part of this very critical discussion.
Thank you so much, Pamela, and thank you to ITC. I mean, the human is at the center of the corridor. And again, going back to Gandhi, how we make the human center of these corridor developments will actually make the difference on whether they are sustainable or not. So thank you so much, and good to hear about the great work that you're doing with small business and people. I would like now finally to bring in a young leader to again ground us and really show what the aspirations of the young people are. We have Bethel Madzu all the way in Nigeria. I was privileged to be in Nigeria, Lagos, 2 weeks ago. Anyone who has been to Lagos and you've seen the humdrum of life, community, people, Bethel, as a young leader living in this populous nation, 200 million people, a young aspiring leader wanting to make a difference. When we talk about corridor development for economic prosperity, what are the aspirations of the youth, like yourself, from a corridor perspective? And Bethwell owns a construction firm. Thank you.
Good morning from over here in Nigeria. My name is Bethel Madu, and first of all, I want to say a very big thank you to the organizers of the European Development Days for selecting me as a young leader and for being a part of this panel. So the development of transport networks, as we know, commonly leads to the creation of corridors. And corridor development in so many ways benefits society and benefits the environment which they exist. I'll give an example of a friend by name Ola, back when I lived in the southeastern part of Nigeria. So Ola runs a sort of delivery business. So she does deliveries of products, anything anybody wants, she delivers. And so I think then she ventured into delivery of building materials or so. So at some point, she began facing challenges of delays in delivery, cancellations of businesses and bad deals and stuff like that. And when I had a conversation with her, it all boiled down to bad road network, bad transport network, there in the southeastern part of Nigeria. And the reality of we young people here in Nigeria is that you get to see so many white elephant projects, projects whereby loans are being taken, money is being collected to run these projects, and then you get to see that 6 months, 7 months down the line, these projects are
Bethel, we seem to have lost you, your connectivity, and that's another challenge, I think, for the youth, the frustrations with the internet. So we had lost you, Bethel. Just go on.
Okay, so I'm like, you get to see a lot of white elephant projects, scattered around the country, and then projects that were supposed to, ease traffic and at the same time help ease the movement of people, and distribution of goods between urban and rural areas. These projects get to be stopped halfway. That's one reality we find ourselves, and it's quite challenging because you get to see a number of Nigerians, over here, 70 to 80% of Nigerians, when you ask them what really they want, most Nigerians, most young people want a Nigeria whereby we have a working system that that supports the youth, a working system that supports creation of more employment, a working system that supports the youth, being economically independent, because most young people want to own businesses. Most young people want to have that freedom to make life choices. Most young people, want to have access to services like good communication networks, affordable housing, good training and health facilities. And when these transport networks, when these projects get to be stopped halfway, the main, in one way or the other, it affects, these youth, it affects these young people. And that's a major reason why you get to see a lot of young Nigerians seek for greener pastures in places like South Africa. You get to see a lot of young Nigerians fly to Europe and fly to other countries, across the world, because the reason is that people tend to be pulled to the areas of prosperity. And when the building of this, when these corridors are being developed, when these transport networks are being developed, you get to see development and investment in those regions which exist. You see development in agriculture, you get to see investment in real estate, and that's because a lot of young people, crave for better educational facilities. A lot of young people crave for better employment opportunities. A lot of young people crave for good access to services, like I mentioned, like electricity, communication networks, affordable housing, training and health facilities, and a lot of young people crave for, better transport network to ease traffic, which at some point, affects movement of people from different locations.
Thank you, Bethel. I sense the frustration there. I sense the aspirations and hope, but also the frustrations. And you've talked about the youth living for greener pastures in Africa. We're seeing a lot of Africa to Africa migration, but also to Europe, and many, unfortunately, not making it. In 1 minute or less, I would want you to talk. You have policymakers here, you have leaders, you have the EU, you have government leaders. What can be done to improve competitiveness of the youth in development, skills enhancement, and the rest? What do you think can be done in 1 minute?
Okay. My vision for Nigeria is a Nigeria where there's a sustainable environment as well as an efficient and safe integrated transport network for sustainable development. My passion for construction, came up around 2018 when I first came to Lagos, and that was what led to Brand Designs, which is a construction startup. We offer sustainable building construction services, real estate consultational services, and engineering software trainings. And we have a 30-year plan to help contribute our own quota to shaping the future of cities, in Africa. And so far, in my journey so far over the past 3 years, and I would say some of the challenges which I've faced are basically lack of an enabling environment, poor power supply, poor transport network, poor access to funds, and not enough, government support. And I'll point out that of all these, the most challenge which I faced is actually lack of experience. A young man who actually wants to, make his dreams come true, but I getting someone to pull hands and like this is the path which you should take. This is the step which you should take at this point. This is what you should do. And
I'll take it from there, Bethel. I think you've talked about that needing that helping hand, the mentorship, the capacity building, the support for the youth. And to our audience, we do have aspirations to grow our population to 1.2 billion people. That's for Africa. By 2030, within the next decade, people like Bethel, young people like Bethel, are going to need all the support to take part in this development agenda that is happening on the continent. He's talked of the frustrations, but also the hopes for many youth that we are facing. And you've heard from our panelists on policy, on the need to make it inclusive, on the need for financing, on the need for inclusion, but also on the need for connecting our development reforms. And for me as a moderator, I think it's been an absolute honor to have all of you. I think to the EU, thank you so much. The 11 corridors that are being prioritized, that's a great start under the Global Gateway. We do look forward to working with you in terms of developing our continent. And also as we look at sustainable solutions for getting goods and support out of, goods and products out of Ukraine, I think the words of the Commissioner ring true. Adaptation and quick thinking and quick solutions are going to be the way. I like the idea of the sustainable, safe corridors that are being thought about for Ukraine especially, to keep it going. Let me thank all of you. Please join me in a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you so much. And thank you to the EU for this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, any of the mics? Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Alan, and thanks to your panel, your exceptional panel, for highlighting the role that smart corridors can play in building mutually beneficial linkage between communities and nation and even continents. And this is where we take an hour lunch break. We should be back in about 1:33 p.m., I guess. And when we return, we'll have what would be a promising discussion about infrastructure and how that could be environmentally friendly.